So for those of you who don't know me, it has actually been several years. I used to give these talks in the early 2000s, used to come up to this meeting a lot, and then I had my big conference conflicted with it, and I was not able to come here. I love Ocean City, and I love this area and all that, so it's good to be back. But let you know where I do some of my work. I'm located at Virginia Tech's main campus in Blacksburg, Virginia. So that's kind of in the mountains, so we can do some research on, believe it or not, we do have some vegetable production in that southwestern corner of Virginia. We work on pest management trials there, but also have an excellent colleague, Helen Dowdy, on the eastern shore of Virginia at the AREC, who runs the same trials. So basically, whatever we do, we'll do it on the coast, and then we'll also do it in the mountains, and we actually get some pretty interesting data sometimes, different pest pressures. I was stationed out here for my first 9 years as a faculty member, so a lot of vegetable trial work goes on, and so we run about 30 or 40 pest management type tests on vegetables each year, and we have all this data. We'll send it off to companies. We'll do little things, but the other thing we do is compile it all into a summary, and just let anyone, a crop consultant or something, take a look at. If you want to know how certain insecticides are doing against certain pests. And we do actually put that in the publication with Virginia Cooperative Extension.
And keep the nutrients that were
site. Click on publications. You can find a lot of different things, a lot of similar things that you'll find on the Delaware, the Maryland extension sites. But like this, you'll find the big commercial vegetable guide that hopefully a lot of you have if you're crop consultants. But one thing you'll only find on the Virginia one is when we do summarize some of the work that we do in our trials, and basically put that out with arthropod pest management or something. Search for that, and you'll basically see a summary of all the trials that we do. So I don't have time to talk to you about the results of all of them. But what I'd like to get through today is maybe focus on a couple crops. Sweet corn, which I think a lot of you work with, very popular crop. And then cole crops is kind of a representative vegetable to kind of get a theme across of pest management, integrated pest management. And really what we're looking at here is selecting that appropriate insecticide that kind of fits into the IPM a little bit better, doesn't kill non-target things, and maybe it would be a better approach for these growers and things that you guys can recommend. So that's kind of the overall theme of the talk. Moving into sweet corn, we're going to start it with a little quiz here. Some of you guys do some scouting of sweet corn, recommend certain things. So all things found quite commonly in the Mid-Atlantic area. So this was a corn ear this year in Virginia. So what was this monster in the top there? Anybody? Nobody? It's the same thing as that. Emily? Corn earworm, right? That's our major pest of sweet corn. And how about this one? A little bit smaller, darker head, not as hairy.
The number of replicates that you study.
We're giving this talk, right? So that's European corn borer. This is another one that we'll see, fall armyworm. And then how about this little tiny black beetle that gets in the ears? Anybody? So I heard it. Sap beetles, right? And how about these little tiny maggot-looking things? Sap beetle larvae, right? These are the larvae. So this is very typical of sweet corn and maybe some things. If it's not protected, what's going to happen to it? It is really hard to grow corn with zero protection and not have at least some of these guys show up in it. So we're going to talk to you about IPM approaches in pest management. So the first one, European corn borer. If I was to be given this talk 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or if I'm giving this talk in, say, New England, this is going to be a major topic. This is going to be your number one pest. Came into the U.S. a century ago, European corn borer. Relatively small moth pest. There's your male, there's your female. She'll lay a bunch of fish scale-like eggs on the undersides of the leaves. They'll hatch. And those things, as the name would suggest, bore right into the plant. They could bore into the shank, they could bore into the ear, bore into the stalk. That's how it's a pest. Once it's in there, and you've got your problem. So European corn borer used to be the number one pest when this thing.
It did seem to increase.
It no longer is.
Like I said,
I will show you data just in my lifetime as an entomologist, my career. We used to do pepper
What?
trials. We used to do sweet corn trials.
Get further into some of those.
Corn borer. I mean, it's amazing.
First, let's talk.
80% of our bell peppers would have a corn borer in them if you didn't control it. In this short bit of time, you can't find a corn borer in peppers anymore, at least in my area. And it's more than just my area. We've really lost this pest. These are blacklight trap catches of European corn borer moths on the eastern shore of Maryland. And you can just see it dropping off. And believe me, if this chart continued, you would still not see European corn borer. It's really disappeared. I could show you this from Rutgers as well. And really the bottom line is we've suppressed European corn borer populations region-wide. This has happened in the Corn Belt of the U.S. And the paper has come out showing that. And then Galen Dively is heading up a paper at the University of Maryland, and some of our data are part of that. The same thing has happened in the Mid-Atlantic. We have knocked back this severe insect that came from Europe a century ago. We've really knocked it back seriously. Reasons why? Well, I'll go back. European corn borer loves to lay its eggs on corn. It is a strongly preferred host, and 100% control. If it's BT corn, you will get 0 corn borers. You will wipe out every single one of them.
Sure.
So that combination of 1-2 punch, it wants to go to corn, and you're going to die if you go on corn, has just caused us to really wipe out what used to be the #1 pest. So that's good news. You'll also see fall armyworm. This is very sporadic. This thing is a tropical moth. So there's 0 overwintering going on here. It's overwintering somewhere in South Florida or maybe in the Caribbean, South Texas. This thing has to make its way here, so it's going to get here later, if it's going to get here at all. Some years we don't see it. Some farms you don't see it. So you just never know when you're going to get it. But the one thing it does give you is a heads up. If you're growing corn, and a lot of times it's late corn, because this thing is coming late, and you start to see this shredding, look out. That's fall armyworm. It's going to hit that world stage corn first and let you know it's there. You got to control it. It's going to get in the ear as well. So fall armyworm will at least give you a heads up, and it's clearly not as important as this guy, corn earworm. Bottom line is, looking at the data, about 90% of the pest problems that we have in sweet corn protecting the ear is this beast, corn earworm. It's the driver. It's the #1 pest by far in our area. So this is another moth pest. Now this one does overwinter. Doesn't survive the cold as well as European corn borer. That's why that one's a bigger pest in New England. Corn earworm doesn't survive up there, but it does around here. If we have a severe winter, it's gonna wipe them out. But they're constantly coming up from the south too. So what happens is they sleep late. Right now they're a pupa down in the soil. If it's really, really cold, you may kill a bunch of them. So we may not get some coming out of a farm in, say, somewhere in Pennsylvania that got really cold, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania or something. You got no corn earworms from our field that year, but you're going to get them. They're coming up from the south, wherever they did overwinter. They're going to get here a little bit later. Some years, if it's warm, they may pop right out from your field. So we're kind of in that transition area. We actually are going to be looking at that more, overwintering survival of corn earworm. But bottom line is you're going to get a mix of migrants and overwintering moths that sleep late. So they're going to basically wake up sometime in July. They're not getting going early. They're a little bit later. She will lay a little spherical egg, and she can lay a ton of them, hundreds of eggs. Single moth. They love fresh silk. Lay their little spheres. That egg hatches in a couple days. Corn earworm goes right into the ear, and then you got developing going on, usually in the tip. But as it feeds, that thing can make its way down the ear and really just cause a lot of mess. It eventually merges out, goes down to the soil, and pupates. So that's the corn earworm. You also may see this a lot of times, especially if you get a lot of corn earworm. Sap beetle larvae. You guys already mentioned what it is. We have a couple species, but it's these little maggot-like larvae that are nasty, and you see them in the ears. What we're seeing is that most of the time, this wasn't the pest. It just followed corn earworm. You may have had a corn earworm for a little bit and it died, or maybe it came out, maybe it was killed by BT corn, but corn earworm basically opened the door, and sap beetle came in behind it. And what you see is sap beetles in your ear, and you think it's the sap beetle problem, but it's usually a pest that's following following another insight. So we did a survey recently in Virginia this past winter, 35 commercial growers. We really want to know what they're doing currently and whether there's any ways we can improve their IPM practices. And really the vast majority of growers, not only Virginia, this is representative of probably the whole country, pyrethroids are really used heavily in sweet corn against pests. Reasons why, because you spray so often. There's some areas where you're maybe spraying every 2 days. It's hard to spray anything but a pyrethroid because they're so cheap and they're available and they're registered and there's so many of them. So pyrethroids are really the primary control tactic that's used vast majority of growers except or organic growers, obviously. So there's a whole litany of products that are out there. This isn't even all of them. These are just the most popular ones: Asana, Permethrin, Baythroid, Tombstone, Warrior, blah, blah, blah. They're all pyrethroids. They're all broad spectrum. They all pretty much do the same thing, which is kill these leps. However, pyrethroid resistance is becoming an increasing issue with corn earworm, our chief pest that we're trying to control. And I'll just show you a little bit of data, but I will mention that Sally Taylor is going to be talking later in the field crop section, and she's going to show you some more data on what's going on with pyrethroid resistance with this insect. But really what they've done for years, for decades, is these are cypermethrin, a pyrethroid-coated vial, and you'll go out to our corn earworm traps, and you go out there and you take the moths out of there and you put them in these vials. If it's coated with 5 micrograms of cypermethrin, that moth should be dead. They've done that work in the south. That's the dose that's going to be effective. And as you see in the early 2000s when we were doing this, we had very few moths survive in the cypermethrin vials. You put one in there, it was going to be dead the next day. But sometime around 2008, about 10-fold more survival. You've got about 20% of them now that are not being killed. Then we've had another jump that's happened about 5 years later, and it seems to be holding, and that is that you're getting more and more survivals. Pretty soon, we're going to get all of them surviving, potentially, because what we have is pyrethroid-resistant genes out there in the corn earworms, and they're breeding, and it seems to be spreading. We're trying to get a handle on, is this something that's local? Is this something that may be happening on a single farm? But it's a mess because you got migrant moths moving in, mixing with the populations. You may have some survival going on during the winter, but you may not. It's really going to be really hard to map. But the problem is, across Virginia, this seems to be a big problem. It's probably the same going on in Maryland and Delaware as well, which is we are right on the verge of pyrethroids not working against corn earworm. I promise you, look at the trends. It's getting worse and worse, and we're about to maybe not have pyrethroids work. So Dr. Taylor's going to tell you more about this, but I'm going to talk about some of the other things with spraying these pyrethroids. So we're talking maybe 6-7 times spraying a pyrethroid on a sweet corn crop for some growers. So you're hitting it with that same chemistry over and over. That's not good for resistance development. And the other thing is, what else are you killing? When I went out, I'm paying a lot more attention to sweet corn now. When I go out when it's shedding pollen, and there is no doubt what I see, I hear it. I never realized how many, because corn's not an insect-pollinated crop. When you think of protect the bees, you go to some crop that, like a cucurbit, where, oh yeah, the bee comes, pollinates, you get the squash, yes, I get it all. Corn, it may not be insect-pollinated, but the bees love that pollen. It's a great source. At that time, it could be one of the best pollen sources for them. So they're running in, collecting the pollen, bringing it back. It's drawing in a whole slew of things that love pollen. And sweet corn has a lot of bees in it, believe me. The other thing it has, lady beetles, they show up when it starts pollinating. First, they engorge themselves on pollen. They love it. High protein. It gives them the energy to mate. It gives her the energy to lay her eggs, produce these larvae that are going to feed on corn earworm eggs, going to feed on aphids. So they all come to the corn. That's happening. You got this little tiny bug, minute pirate bugs. They show up when it's pollinating. They'll feed on the pollen. They also feed on corn earworm eggs. They do a heck of a number on them. All these things are showing up at that stage, and then what are growers doing? The vast majority of them, bam, spraying that broad spectrum pyrethroid. You're killing them all. You're killing all these things. Now granted, they're selling corn. These things really have nothing to do with your corn production, you got to get rid of corn earworm, but keep that in mind. You got resistance problems. You're wiping out all these things that are actually considered beneficial. So it's like, all right, I still have to control corn earworm, so I'm still spraying them. This is what's happened. I've had several growers call me, and they'll say, what do you do about it? Well, someone tell me what this is, first of all. All over the husk of a ear of corn. Anybody? I hear it, aphids. Yep, corn leaf aphids. So I've had growers, every time I hear that they have a corn leaf aphid problem, coating the outside of that leaf, it's sticky with honeydew, coated with aphids, I don't even have to ask them. I'm like, how many pyrethroids have you sprayed? Oh, I keep spraying. They're thinking I'm like, you should have sprayed more. I'm like, no, I sprayed them about 7 times. I'm like, I know. That's why you have the aphid problem. You won't have corn leaf aphid issues unless you come in and start bombarding them with pyrethroid sprays, because the natural enemies will help keep these populations down. So hopefully I've just brought to attention, it's like, yeah, maybe every 2 days with a pyrethroid may not be the best thing. That's all I'm asking for. Maybe it may not be the best approach. Might be the cheapest, and in some years, actually, you got no other choice, but there's some issues when you do that. And so is there a way that maybe we can fit in IPM a little bit, integrated pest management, into the sweet corn system? Well, yes. You have ways of monitoring your chief pest, corn earworm. You can put out pheromone traps, little pheromone lure there. The moth comes in, gets caught in the top. You can see how many you caught each evening. Got black light trap monitoring going on. They're drawn to the light. You can count moths every day. This is not something where you monitor it to the level where it's 6. If it reaches 8, we're going to go and spray. There's no time for that. You're already gearing up to spray in the morning before you even counted the moths. But it does give you an idea. It's like, I've gone out there and I'm not seeing any. That's where you've got to use this. It's like, we're not seeing them yet. Well, if you got to spray sweet corn, that's telling you there's probably no moths laying eggs. These traps are very effective. You can look at things regional wide. If you look on crop alerts, and there's times where we're not catching corn earworm moths. That's good. I've had a grower in the northern neck of Virginia who tried this on his own, put out these corn earworm traps, and was really hesitant early on. He's like, I don't know. He had planted corn early. Corn was ready in mid-July. It's like, I don't know. I'm really nervous. I'm not catching anything in these traps. He had 3 traps out. I said, that's good. It's still early. I said, you don't have corn earworm. I said, that's a really good. He goes, yeah, but I don't know. Well, he did save the spray. And ever since, he's told me he saves about 1 to 2 sprays by monitoring for these moths. A lot of time it's on his earlier sweet corn. So there is a way to open up a little bit of IPM into some of these systems. So here's just things. These are over 3 decades of catching moths in these traps. And really it shows you that corn earworm doesn't get going until about mid-July. So if you can get corn out of the ground before then, or got a lot of these sprays that are happening, you may not have much corn earworm pressure, which means you probably don't need as many sprays. And that's really got a lot of potential for IPM. In some heavy years, you get into late August and stuff, you're going to have corn earworm problems. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, can we spray something other than a pyrethroid? And yes, there's other products out there. Some diamides have been registered. Coragen is one of them. What are diamides? They're a lot safer on natural enemies. They don't kill pollinators. And we did have belt. Belt was another diamide. We don't have it anymore. Last year they took it off the market. So really we're down to coragen being the only diamide, although Besiege has both coragen plus a pyrethroid. Blackhawk is a spinosad that's out there, a lot safer on natural enemies as well. So what we've been looking at, and this is one example on the Eastern Shore, is can you rotate your sprays? That's good for resistance management, first of all, but it's also when you spray that diamide, you're not killing all these other things. So, and how about let's start with that diamide, because that's when the pollen's shedding, that's when you're going to start spraying, and maybe that's the time to fit that diamide in there. So we actually looked at that. So we looked at an IPM approach versus a conventional. The IPM approach being you only spray if the moth catch is telling you that you have to. And then when you do spray, you start out with this diamide. Go a little softer. Don't kill predators. Maybe let them do a little bit of things. Maybe not kill the pollinators. And then eventually you have to switch to a pyrethroid. You can't spray coragen more than twice. You're going to max out. So, but at least you've gotten under a good system going. So that's what we looked at, is those approaches. So really 3 treatments, replicated 4 times. We've got it in different experiments. And we'll basically just show you the summary of them, which is really, blue is IPM. We ended up just spraying 4 times based on the moth counts. Conventional sprayed 6 times, about every 2 to 3 days. Spraying none in the control. And yeah, spraying none. We had over 40-some larvae in 25 ears. That's pretty heavy pressure. And really comparable control with the IPM approach versus this is summarized over 4 trials versus straight pyrethroid. So there is potential there, these systems, to maybe fit some IPM in there. So the other thing, back to the survey that we did with our growers in Virginia, wondering how many are actually using BT sweet corn. And it's getting close to 50%. It's 43% of growers have switched to the BT sweet corn with their systems, and even some of the ones that aren't are organic growers, so they're never going to use the BT sweet corn. So it's widely used, at least in sweet corn. So what do we have with sweet corn? When I first started in the early 2000s, there was just the cry protein, a single BT protein that really targeted green tissue. So the insect usually had to eat green tissue in order to kill it. It was targeting European corn borer, a little bit of corn earworm. These things first came out. That was the original attribute line from Syngenta. Since then, we now have attribute 2, which is stacked proteins. It has the cry protein, but also has the VIP protein in it, which are different BT proteins that are produced by Bacillus thuringiensis, the bacteria that'll kill these lep larvae. So, okay, what is it with the BT? What kind of control do we get? First of all, European corn borer, which can bore into stalks, bore into the whorls, 100% control. I would, nothing's 100%. We'll say 99 point something percent. But in my whole career, I have never seen a BT corn plant have a corn borer in it. It is very, very effective against that insect pest. So you're getting that. First of all, you're wiping those insects out. But the thing that the growers care most about in sweet corn is protecting that ear. What kind of control is it giving us against those worms in the ear? This is a trial that, first of maybe multiple years we're going to do this, headed up by Galen Dively, University of Maryland. Several states there, 15 locations. We're evaluating BT sweet corn varieties and seeing how well they're performing at just multiple locations, different pest pressures. And if you want to look at these two, this is Remedy and Milky Way. These are the attribute 2 lines, so they have both BT proteins, the cry and the VIP. And you're getting 99%, 97%, almost complete control of your worm pests with these two genes. And I will say that the ones that we did get damage, it was a really teeny tiny corn earworm that was probably going to die. But when we evaluated it, it hadn't died yet, so we had to count it as a damaged ear with a worm in it. But right now, these things are excellent. Do you have to pay the price for this technology? Absolutely. It's going to come with a price tag. But how about some of these other, the original Cry1AB proteins? Well, about 85% damaged ears. And that has changed just in my career. We used to get really, really good control, and now you got about 85% damage still planting BT corn alone. So a lot of growers are still planting these, but they're also using chemical control. So it's a combination of the two that's going on right now. But just give you an idea of what some options are with the transgenic. So really, take-home messages for sweet corn IPM moving forward. What do we know? In this area, by far, corn earworms, your chief driver of pest management. It is your major pest that you're dealing with. And that this populations that we have are developing resistance to our main tool that we're using to control it, pyrethroids. So it's an issue that could change rapidly and for the worse, that we're going to have to use some other things to control this. And also, spraying those pyrethroids, you're killing a lot more than corn earworm, a lot of things that we don't want to kill. And regarding the BT, that the ones with the two genes, the stacked genes, are the ones that are working really well. If you just go with the single attribute 1, that you're probably going to have a lot of corn earworm issues still in that beet.
Is that,
Moving on to another
it can impact,
brassicas. Anyone deal with collards, cabbage, broccoli growers? Some of you guys? Good. Well, everything I'm telling you with brassicas, there's probably another situation with vegetables where a lot of the same theme, a lot of the same things I'm going to talk about make sense with that system as well. But we're going to use brassicas as an example of a representative vegetable. So anyone see this damage? You plant some cabbage, especially in high organic matter, and see a lot of seedlings dying. Anyone know what the problem is? Could be a lot of things, but we've had a lot more of this happening. That damage is caused by a maggot, which was flies are drawn to organic matter. This is a cabbage maggot fly, and they lay their eggs at the base of the plant, and the little maggot feeds on the roots and tunnels in. This is what these are, falling out of a dead seedling of cabbage that's out there. We're seeing more and more problems in like the northern neck of Virginia with this pest. Seems to be real outbreak situation. What do we know about cabbage maggot? It's a tiny little fly, smaller than a house fly. The one good thing to help cue you in on potential problems, one, you have to have high organic matter soil. They're really attracted to that. You won't see the flies flying until you see wild mustard and wild radish flowering. It's timed perfectly. That flowers, the flies wake up, and they're looking for places to drop their eggs, and she's going to come in there and lay her eggs. If you get a lot of moisture, the maggots will survive, or the eggs will hatch, maggots will survive, and you got a problem. If you didn't put something down at planting, you got a problem. You can't do anything about it.
a lot of these are actually like manure biochars.
This growers doing, well, they're putting a preventative down.
Capacity from 0 to 100.
Lorsban, an organic phosphate that's been around for a while, is still the number one control tactic, the most effective. We almost lost Lorsban this past year. I thought we'd be moving on with talks of these other products, and how well they're working and all that, but no, it got saved. And one of the reasons is there's some situations where some pests that right now that's the only thing that's going to really give you the most effective control, and cabbage maggot is one of those pests. So that's what a lot of growers are using. There are some other things. You'll notice Verimark, this is one of those diamides, just like Coragen. A lot safer on natural enemies, a lot safer. And this thing actually provides control of cabbage maggot as well. It's just a lot more expensive. But there are going to be alternatives once it's done. So now kind of focusing on these diamides and how they kind of fit into, they've been out for over 10 years now, and how they are fitting in IPM systems. And if you don't already recommend them, even if a grower may be resisting because they're a little more expensive than they're used to paying with pyrethroids, that sometimes it makes a lot of sense, and sometimes it fits in really well to systems. So what are diamides? It's actually, the story is pretty interesting. 1940s, and I pulled out this paper, they had discovered that the Ryanine plant in South America produced some compounds. Ryanidine was the compound that was very, very toxic to certain insects, especially Lepidopteran pests, caterpillars. And they were sitting on that. They also knew that it was actually a new, unique way of killing it. It was a muscle poison. They couldn't contract their muscles, so they couldn't feed, they couldn't move, they're going to die. And they knew that in the 1940s, but something else was going on in the 1940s after World War II, and that was the start of the whole pesticide revolution. They were equipped with nerve poisons. Coming back from the war, we had discovered nerve poisons. We'd also discovered a couple things, and it was a new, tougher approach to, I want something that stays in the ground forever, gets it done, and I want something that kills everything. Two approaches of pest management. That was what they wanted. It was tough, man. Well, what do we want now? We don't want something that lasts forever in the ground. We don't want something that kills everything. So times have changed big time, but at that time when they had that, they just put it on the shelf. It's like, I don't want this thing. Doesn't kill everything. They moved on to all these other chemistries, and we saw the cyclodienes, we saw the organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids. We've completely cycled back to, let's go back to that, and basically they have synthesized some compounds that work as well as what was in the Ryanine plant. Very selective, very effective, very safe. We don't have that ryanidine receptor in us, so it's going to not affect vertebrates. It's going to go right through us, not toxic at all. But very, very toxic to things like caterpillars, and depending on the diamide, maybe some other ones, and that's what we're going to talk about. So Veramark's another one that's put down in the soil, taken up systemically, and we are still unraveling what are all the pests that this thing kills. We know it kills Lepidopteran pests. All the diamides will kill the lep pests. They're excellent on them, some of the best materials we have. What we don't know is what else are they killing. So we're doing a lot of work on that and have been over the last 5 to 10 years. So one thing is flea beetles, a pest that I have to admit most of my career I ignored. I didn't think they were much of an issue. They looked like they were too tiny. That damage can't be causing yield loss. That's what I thought. But I have a student who just finished 2 years of working on these things, and like it was eyebrow raising to me the damage that these things do actually do. They're little tiny beetles, and just their numbers can be hellacious, and that was where you can really cause some problems. But the problem is they're early season. You put a transplant out, and you've moved on to the next transplanting, and you go back to the first transplant that put out, and it is just covered with flea beetles, at least down in Virginia. And it's like, whoa, this is pretty scary, and the only way to be controlling that at that time is to have something maybe going down in the transplant water. To protect that plant, or you got to follow right up after planting with a spray. So what we looked at first of all is like, can they really cause much damage? The little bit of feeding that they're doing, and so we looked at controlling flea beetles to get different defoliation levels: 0%, 20% defoliation, 50 or so, and then greater than 60. And then we harvested cabbage heads, and how much did that really affect yield at that defoliation level, flea beetle feeding? And I mean, all you got to do is just see the pattern in both years. Yes, even a little bit of, 20% early on ended up affecting your cabbage yield later. That plant had to compensate for all that plant loss. And it really told me that you got to control flea beetles. You're getting a lot of yield loss from these things that you didn't maybe even realize. Just visually, this is the heaviest default. Didn't even produce a cabbage head. This was just flea beetles. So, okay, bottom line is we got to control them. There's something we got to worry about. So there are neonicotinoids that are labeled for soil application, and they are effective against flea beetles. And there's a lot of pyrethroid sprays going on as a foliar. But we looked at some other things. Maybe a neonic that some growers haven't used, dinotephuron. A lot of growers are using imidacloprid or thiamethoxam, platinum or admire. What about this dinotephuron, which is actually a lot more water soluble? It may be taken up quicker by the plant. It may actually provide a little bit better control. So we looked at that. We also looked at the diamide, Veramark. And, these all were providing control of flea beetles up until a point. But really the best was this venom, this dinotephuron. And it provided the best control and gave us the highest yield of cabbage heads. And this was all targeting flea beetles on cabbage. So, dinotephuron may not be one that you guys are currently recommending, but the good news about that one is it's actually found in multiple products: venom, scorpion, Certidor. Hopefully that means competition, and that some of these growers can use. So, okay, another issue and probably the biggest issue with growing brassicas is the Lepidopteran pest. A lot of these caterpillars that are going to come in there. And these are kind of the big three. If you look up textbook of brassica pest management, you're always going to hear talking about diamondback moth, cabbage looper, imported cabbage worm, one of the few butterfly pests of agricultural crops. These are the big three, and they're really out there every year. And clearly the drivers of pest management. When we run trials in Virginia, we always get these three. In some years, and I can tell you one year that I did it on the Eastern Shore, we got all three of those plus all 5 of these in a single test. I loved it. It's one of my greatest insecticide tests because I had all these pests. You could answer so many of these questions with, if you were a grower that year, it was pretty tough. It was a heavy lep year, but you'll get cabbage webworm, cross-striped cabbage worm, and even some of these other insects that you'll see on a lot of different crops. Anyway, bottom line is there's a lot of leps that could get into your brassicas, and you're going to have to control them. There's really good thresholds. You can treat them all as a whole. When more than 20% of your plants has a caterpillar on it, before that crop starts producing a head, that's when the trigger is to spray. Those IPM systems work very well. Unless you're growing where the leafy brassica, like collards or something, collards or kale, where your direct marketable product is your leaf. These thresholds work very well for things like cabbage and broccoli. The other good news is you got a lot of biological control, natural enemies, and you got a slew of insecticides that don't kill natural enemies that you can put into these systems, and they work really well. I had a student one year looking at diamondback moth. We pulled the larvae in from the field, put them in petri dishes, and 70% of them gave rise to this wasp. That was really high parasitism levels going on. This thing needs to stay in the system because it's keeping diamondback moth down in our area. Anything you can do to not wipe this thing out is going to help you. There's a lot of other parasitoids doing their number on these Lepidopteran pest. They're sitting ducks out there. They're laying flat out on a cabbage leaf. I mean, these things are just, it's like a golden corral for natural enemies. I mean, they just come right to it, and there's just plenty of different ones to feed on. Anyway, the bottom line is you don't want to kill these natural enemies. They're doing a good job on you. There are fortunately a lot of good insecticides to fit into vegetable systems, especially brassicas, and BT being one of them. It's been around for a long time. This isn't BT transgenics. This is the actual product, BT, like dipel. Work really, really well against all these leaf-feeding lepidopterans, particularly when you target them when they're a little bit smaller in size. You put that out there, you don't kill natural enemies. They keep doing what they're doing, and you can help knock back your lep problems. In addition to that, there's a lot of, there's some diamides, coragen, there's spinosins like Radium, Blackhawk, Intrepid Edge. There's all kinds of chemistries out there and what you want to do is rotate. You don't want to just keep spraying the same one because you're going to lose it. Diamondback moth is in the system. That is one of the most globally an insect that has developed the resistance to the most insecticides. It almost is like as soon as a product hits market, give it a year or two, and you're going to find a diamondback moth population somewhere in Asia, very likely, that has already developed resistance to it. So you want to rotate chemistries. You want to not use some of these. I could show you trial after trial, but really the bottom line is all these materials that are a lot more IPM friendly really wipe out your Lepidopteran complex. This is just one example of a Virginia Beach trial. They work very, very well. But I also want to talk to you about some of the versatility of these diamides. So one thing when you're planting things like cabbage and broccoli, you've got transplant water that's going out. You can apply some of these diamides like coragen, Verimark, Derivo. These are all systemic insecticides. So you may be putting them down for that cabbage maggot anyway, right? Remember Verimark was a product that you could use instead of Lursban? Control cabbage maggot. It's also going down into transplant water, moving up in the plant and providing protection against all of these leps, these lep pests. So this is a trial where we put it in the transplant water, and I could show you numerous ones on different vegetables. This is all the way to harvest. How many of the cabbage heads were infested with caterpillars? Here's your coragen, put down once and put down at a high rate of transplanting. But both of them worked better than spraying the pyrethroid multiple times as a foliar. That's a long protection with a diamide. Pretty safe way to go and pretty IPM friendly as well. There are products out there like Derivo which have the diamide in it, but then also have a neonicotinoid in it. So that's something a grower could do preventatively. Just put this down in the transplant water. We did this one year. I didn't even know what pests we were going to get, but we had Derivo in the trial. We had cabbage webworm in a hellacious level. This thing will come in and attack cabbage. It kills the growing point, and you get no head on any of these plants. So you could get 100% damage from cabbage webworm. You get 0 cabbage heads. It's really, really bad. And you also don't see it coming. It hides really well. You don't know it's there until it's too late. So having something down in the transplant water with something like that is really, really effective. So we happen to have Derivo down. This is percentage of infested plants with webworms, and we lost about a quarter of them, killed the plants in the control, and virtually none Derivo plots. We also happen to get an outbreak of green peach aphids on these brassicas. And because it had thiamethacin, because it was the combo, it controlled those as well, and we had no aphids on these plants. So it's just an example of maybe a preventative approach is a good way to go for a grower if there's the potential of some of these combination of pests that are out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on aphids real quick, since I did happen to mention those. Green peach is a really big problem aphid in our areas. We also may get this monster here, the cabbage aphid, kind of bluish, a lot of waxy coating on them. We had them in Virginia really bad last year in some of our fields. Anyway, you can get these two aphids. There's not a lot of viruses. Aphids transmit a lot of viruses to a lot of crops, but there's not a lot of issues with the brassicas so much with that, but you do need to worry about aphids. I have seen plants just shrivel up, wilt up, just too much aphid pressure on them. So it's definitely something to deal with. And the one thing is, you start spraying pyrethroids, again, you will get more aphids when you're spraying those products out there. So sometimes it's something that you bring in. Who can tell me what these colored aphids are? Mummies, very good. So this is actually a good sign. It's telling you that something else has found your aphids. Parasitic wasps have come in, and they will take care of your aphids because they will keep emerging out the trapdoor, finding another aphid. They're sitting ducks. They will sting them. The wasps will develop, and your aphid populations will go down. A lot of times you don't have time for that. You got to get this vegetable crop out in about another 30 days or so. But it's also good not to wipe this out of your system, these parasitic wasps. There's also a lot of things also coming in when aphids build up. These predators, they will sit and vacuum them up and eat them. So you want that to be happening. You want these natural enemies to do what they're doing, but then you also have got to get rid of them too in some instances. So you're kind of stuck with this. So you don't want to spray something to kill these natural enemies. Is really, and there's a lot of things out there. One, the neonics are really well because they come up systemically and control these aphids. They never get going. Problem is there's some growers who don't want to sell vegetables or can't sell vegetables where you use neonicotinoids. There's some issues out there, so that may not be an option for you. It's still the best one for aphids. There's a lot of excellent aphicides that are out there that you can spray that don't kill natural enemies, don't kill pollinators, and do a heck of a job. I'm just going to run through them quickly, but Belief is one that's been out for about a decade. Movento has got two-way systemic. You can spray it above the plant, it moves into the plant, and gets those aphids feeding underneath. These things are, Closer's one that was registered, they took it away, and now it's back with a little bit different name, Isoclass Active thrown in there now. These things are a lot safer on natural enemies. Savanto's a new one that's kind of neonic-like, but it's really not. A little safer on the bees. And Harvanta is a diamide. It's one that wipes out the leps, like all the diamides, but it actually gets a lot of these aphids as well. It's one that was just registered last year. Bottom line, I could show you slide after slide. These things work really well at all the aphids that attack vegetables. And here's that Harvanta actually controlling aphids. We had 850-some aphids on 5 leaves, and Harvanta really wiping them out, and that's a Lepidopteran material. So we've got some really good chemistries out there. Who can tell me what this insect is? No. Harlequin bug, you nailed it. If you're in the south, you see a lot more of these, but you'll see this one creep into brassicas as well, and we have been fortunate enough to have put out a trial for aphids or leps and happen to get harlequin bug, and we are able to answer how some of these chemistries work against harlequin bug. These are all materials targeting aphids, and we had 266 harlequin bugs on 5 plants and virtually none with any of these other chemistries. So these safer chemistries actually are controlling a much broader spectrum of pests that are out there, and you know, it's really encouraging for potential IPM systems. There's a lot of tools out there now. That's all I have. I want to thank all my students, my lab, and especially Helen on the Eastern Shore AREC, who really puts all these trials out for me on the eastern part while I'm doing them on the western part. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Everyone's hungry.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for
Sure.
the great